Good evening. We're back with another episode of the Lord of the Rings LCG Progression Series, and today we'll be going over the lore and quest strategy for Journey Along the Anduin, the second quest of the core set. So once more we'll be detailing where on the map exactly the quest will be going, and then going over the strategy for this quest. So if you recall in the last episode, on the last quest, we were traveling from Thranduil down to Lorien. And as this is called Journey Along the Anduin, I presume this quest starts roughly here and will be covering the journey along the Anduin down to Lorien. Although as the Anduin goes all the way down, it's possible that we've already arrived in Lorien and we're on to somewhere else. But let's take a look. For context, Gondor is down here. Mordor, the Shire, is over to the west here. And the Lonely Mountain on this side. So we're heading away from the Lonely Mountain and down the Anduin. Emerging from Mirkwood Forest with an urgent message for Lady Galadriel, you must make your way south along the Anduin River in order to reach the Forest of Lorien. As you leave the forest behind you, you notice that you are being pursued and thus quicken your pace. So, we are here, and just about to head down the Anduin. This particular section of the map, I'm not certain that any characters in the books or movies followed this path. In the Fellowship of the Ring, the Fellowship went down the Anduin, but they started in Lorien. But anyway, as you approach the location of a small raft stashed on the riverbank, a fearsome hill troll emerges from behind a grouping of rocks and attacks. After defeating the troll, you are able to board the raft and embark upon a river voyage. As you depart, your enemies pursue, harassing the small vessel as you attempt to navigate the river. As your enemies harass the raft, it is difficult to maintain balance and effectively fight them off. The ongoing harassment from your enemies has forced your raft to the shore, and you must confront their ambush head-on. If you survive this attack, the path to the Golden Wood should be open before you. The Golden Wood meaning Lorien. And that would be the end. So, the quest will cover this section of the Anduin. And this is a much more difficult quest than the first quest, especially solo. So the first challenge you have to deal with is the initial wall, and this is often the case in solo play, or in multiplayer too, but in solo play the initial wall seems more daunting than in solo play. Each player reveals one card from the top of the encounter deck and adds it to the staging area, so that scales up with more players in the game. However, the other side, search the encounter deck for one troll and place it in the staging area, that doesn't scale up. You get one troll regardless if you're playing this deck with one player or with four. So clearly this is a much more difficult challenge in solo than it is with four players. With four players you'd get four encounter cards, but still only one hill troll. And with one player you get one encounter card and one hill troll. So it's at its most difficult, this quest is, in solo play, at least in the initial stage. And this presents a very obvious deck building challenge, which is engaging a hill troll on turn 1 if you're over 30 threat. If you're playing progression style, you really don't want to do that. In fact, I would say you will make it much harder on yourself if you start over 30 threat with a deck, if you're playing progression style, because it's very difficult to deal with a hill troll on turn 1. There's no hero that can survive an attack on its own if you're playing progression style from a hill troll, which means you have to, if you're over 30 threat and you're going to engage round 1, you have to draw a chump blocker in your opening hand. And not only that, but you also need a way to deal with this encounter card, which could be an innocuous location, or it could be something much more difficult. In fact, if I was playing this true solo, I would almost consider it a loss if I draw anything I have to deal with there. You could draw a Dol Guldur Beastmaster, a Warg, which would engage you immediately and would return to the staging area after attacking, and then so you would have to deal with turn 1 an attack from a Warg and from a Hill Troll. So the priority in this quest is stabilizing the board state early. That's often the case, but not always. Sometimes the board state is relatively stable to begin with, and your priority is building up your strength or questing precisely so that you don't enter into phase 2 too quickly. But in this quest, which is perhaps the most common type, is that the challenge is to get over the wall that the encounter deck presents to start the game. Also in this encounter deck are a variety of treacheries, at least a couple, that punish you for being over 35 threat. That was a trend relatively early in the game's life cycle that eventually went away, to the point where you don't worry too much about what your starting threat is. You don't really want to be over, 32 or so, but it often isn't that big of a deal if you are. And now we have player cards that reward you for being over 40 threat. You also have snipers in this quest that sit in the staging area and shoot at you anytime a new enemy comes in, or at the end of the combat phase. I think in this case it's at the end of the combat phase. So this quest really emphasizes low threat, starting out lower than 30 and keeping your threat under 35. If you can do that and deal with the Hill Troll, and you don't really want to, this is a quest, and this is a very common theme with quests, is clearing the staging area before advancing between stages, between phases of the quest. So ideally, you would like to, you're not going to, probably with most combinations of heroes, you're not going to be staying under 30 threat for more than 2 or 3 turns. So you have 2 or 3 turns to get set up to defeat the Hill Troll, which often requires the assistance of Gandalf to take the Hill Troll attack and deal damage to the Hill Troll, but not always. It does have 9 HP, which is enough so that you can't sneak attack Gandalf and then play Gandalf to kill it, and that's probably deliberate. So you do have to at least do a little combat damage to it. And this Hill Troll, in keeping with the theme of this quest, which is staying under 35 threat, if it does additional attack damage to you after it kills somebody, like if you use a Snowborn Scout or something as a chump blocker, so that it only deals 1 damage and kills it and then has 5 excess, you have to convert that to threat, which will greatly impede your ability to stay under 35 for the sake of the treacheries. So starting out at low threat and playing threat reduction cards are pretty important for this quest, or else you'll make it much harder on yourself. But should you manage to deal with the Hill Troll and whatever encounter card comes up, you don't really want to advance to phase 2 without doing that, in my experience. So you want to plan on not questing that much, or questing pretty lightly, until you defeat the Hill Troll, clear the staging area, and get your strength built up on the board. Because in phase 2, you're going to be revealing 2 encounter cards per phase. This is in addition to revealing 2 encounter cards per phase, you don't make engagement checks, which means all the enemies that get revealed as you're making progress will just stack up in the staging area, making it harder and harder for you to progress because they add their threat against yours. And when you get to the final stage, all the enemies that were in the staging area are now going to engage you at once, assuming your threat is high enough to engage them, in addition to 2 more revealed encounter cards. So what you want to do is defeat the initial challenge of the quest and then build up your strength on the board to the point where you can progress through phase 2 in 1 or 2 turns ideally, because that will limit as much as possible the cards that are revealed from the encounter deck and that stack up against you. You can easily get to a point, if your board state is too weak, where you build up the cards so high or so much threat against you that you actually can't advance anymore, and then you're just done. That can happen as a result of locations that you can't clear or enemies that you can't clear, since you can't engage them, except you can optionally engage one enemy each encounter phase, but you're revealing 2 cards per quest phase, so you can often get 2 enemies per phase and you can only engage one of them. And so you have to have a board state sufficient to make progress on the quest and deal with 1 enemy per round typically. And you want to have your board state strong enough that you can go through phase 2 in 2 turns, maybe possibly 3, but probably preferably 2. And that often requires a card like Faramir that boosts your willpower, one of my favorite cards in the game. And it punishes decks that are heavy in tactics, because tactics cards are pretty light on willpower, especially at this point in the game. So I ran, I think, a combination leadership spirit deck for this quest in order to hopefully build up a board state. You may also, if you haven't used Gandalf for the Hill Troll, or you've got more plays of Gandalf, you can use him. I would use him during this time, during phase 2, and not save him for phase 3 in order to use his 4 willpower to help you get through phase 2 of the quest. This is the major challenge of the quest after the initial wall. Initial wall, then phase 2, and if you get through it relatively unscathed, phase 3 isn't that hard. You reveal 2 encounter cards and add them to staging, but you don't reveal any more cards from the encounter deck for the remainder of the game, because you then skip the staging step for the remainder of the game. So the only reason to quest from this point is to prevent threat, and if you actually have threat to spare, you may not want to quest at all and just eat the threat, because you know you're not going to reveal any more encounter cards. So if I was at, for example, 36 or 37 threat, I know I'm not revealing any more treacheries. If I had 7 or 8 threat against me, I may just not quest with anybody, save them all for combat, and then you don't reveal any cards, and then, because this 3rd stage is just combat. So some things to consider. First, defeat the Hill Troll. Start out under 30 threat. Defeat the Hill Troll and whatever encounter card you may in the setup. If you're playing true solo progression style, want to just concede until you get a dud for your other card. I wouldn't blame you if you did. In fact, I think I might have done that. I'm not sure. I think it took 7 or 8 attempts for me to beat this quest in true solo. It's very tough relative to the first quest, relative to how much experience players are typically going to have trying to tackle this. It's tough. And so once you defeat the Hill Troll and clear the staging area, then you can advance into stage 2. Assuming you've built up your board to a state where you consider it reasonably likely that you can clear stage 2 in 2 turns, maybe 3, but preferably 2. Which usually means getting Faramir on board or using Gandalf. But not always. Celebrian Stone can also be helpful on Aragorn for additional willpower, and using Eowyn can be very helpful for her 4 willpower. Aragorn with Celebrian Stone and Eowyn are 8 by themselves, and if you added in Gandalf, that would be 12. Or if you added Faramir in a random collection of allies. So Steward of Gondor early can be very helpful with getting out Faramir relatively early, because you need the resources to pay his 4 resource cost. If you get through phase 2 in 2 or 3 turns, you're probably doing pretty good and you're gonna win. If you've got a board state capable of getting through Anduin passage in 2 turns, then you're probably able to handle the challenge of phase 3. Though there's a lot that can go wrong. Some of the things that you can go wrong that you should expect or look for are a second Hill Troll in the deck. The wargs can be really annoying and often require a play of Gandalf to deal with them, because if they're dealt a shadow card with no effect, they run away, then you don't get a chance to attack them. You've got a treachery which deals 1 damage to each exhausted character, so you have to take that into account when you're trying to decide who's going to take which attacks, or who's going to take a damage from Dol Guldur orcs. Because if you assign the damage so that each character is maxed out and can't take 1 more damage, and then you get and then you quest with them and you draw this treachery, they'll die. You've got cards that raise your threat for each character that are not currently committed to a quest. Card that raises your threat when they attack you. The general theme of this deck is trying to get you to raise your threat and then punishing you for doing it, with a few different treacheries. 1 damage to each character controlled by each player with a threat of 35 or higher. I thought there was another one, but maybe there isn't. Oh, there is. Each player with a threat of 35 or higher chooses and discards 1 card. That one's not as big a deal. The 1 damage is when combined with the Necromancer's Reach. So, that's the challenge of this quest, and the way to defeat it is prioritizing higher willpower. I'd consider Anduin pretty essential, and I'd strongly recommend Faramir in a deck so that you can get through phase 2 in 2 or 3 turns. And starting under 30 willpower helps quite a bit if you're playing progression style. So, that's Journey along the Anduin. It's quite a ramp up in difficulty from the first quest. And if you are running into problems beating it, I don't blame you, because it's tough. It takes 6 or 7 or 8 attempts even with a good deck and knowing what you're doing. Thanks for watching.